your question, it includes airfare and the trip itself. Did I answer? I'm not sure I answered that appropriately, but okay, everybody, it's wonderful to see you. We finished the first parak, or the first verse of our first chapter, which and I'm not even going to go over it again because we went over it twice, but essentially it gives us the transmission from Sinai to the men of the Great Assembly who composed our Pirkei Avot, who composed the Mishnah, to remind us that just as our laws, Shabbat, kosher, tzedakah, just as our laws come from Sinai, our ethics come from Sinai. I'm looking to see, some people were very interested in talking about where ethics stem from. These ethics too come from Sinai. And we also spoke at length, and we're not going to speak about it this week, but it was a critical plan B. Judaism is filled with plan Bs, dating all the way back to Adam and Eve, who it was supposed to go a certain way. They acted a certain way, and boom, the world went into plan B. The Torah is filled with plan Bs. Plan B really is plan A, in the sense that it is the evolutionary process of the human being, or in this case, the nation of Israel, where the Jewish people had to move from a more passive religion in the form of prophecy and the temple, where everybody wasn't necessarily learned or necessarily super involved, on an individualized participatory level. They were more the recipients of the temple and of the prophets telling them what to do. When prophecy ended, and it didn't just end, it was a time in history of great despair. The temple had been destroyed, and there was a sense of, was the covenant annulled? These great rabbis came and said, God forbid that the covenant was annulled. We have to move into plan B. And they moved from a Judaism of prophecy to a Judaism called, what we call today, which is called Rabbinical Judaism. And what that really meant was we all are obligated and privileged to learn Torah. The prayer, official institutional prayer, was introduced. It was a much more participatory, active religion, where we were much more engaged. Our home became like the temple and all the mitzvot of the home. And this is where we moved into. Now, the danger of a religion where the human being is more at the center, of course, God is at the center, but the human being is very proactively involved. And this is where I'm getting to, just as we review the first verse. The danger is that a human being needs to understand that they are incredibly, and this is so relevant to us today, we are incredibly powerful. We are incredibly creative. We are created in the image of God. And therefore, just as God is all creating, we too are creators. Just as God makes worlds, we can make worlds. We have so much inside of us, but we also have to simultaneously know our frailty. So, and know where we are limited, and respect ourselves and love ourselves, but always be vaguely suspicious of ourselves, meaning never to be smug and assume that the way we see things, or our triggered reactions or our immediate reactions, never to confuse those necessarily with truth, to always be mildly skeptical about our perspective. The first verse is really about the great responsibility of the individual in Rabbinic Judaism, in prayer, in Torah learning, in mitzvot, in changing the world, in literally partnering with Hashem to change the world, but simultaneously knowing, you know what, I've got to be careful. Just because I see something a certain way doesn't mean it's so. I have a fragile ego. I have an ego that will make me feel something is true when it's not. I always have to be mildly skeptical of my reactions. My favorite verse from Rabbi Abraham Twersky, who of course was a famous, not only a great rabbi, He died not so long ago, but he was also he was a psychiatrist and an addictions counselor. And Rabbi Twersky said the words, listen to this, in all my years of drinking, I never once took a drink unless I decided that it was the right thing to do at the time. And anyone who's struggled with any form of addiction knows exactly what Rabbi Twersky means. What he's saying is when you step outside of the desire to have a drink, you know you don't want to have a drink, but when you want that drink at that moment, you convince yourself that it's the right thing to do. And that's the nature of the human condition. And so our rabbis say, you are so powerful, but we are also we're frail, and we have to be careful about what's in Hebrew is called like our negiyas. Our negiyas means our biases. Just because you see something a certain way, a wise person can say, okay, just because I feel this, my ego is telling me he doesn't care about me. My ego is telling me she wronged me. My ego is telling me this. Just because I'm feeling this and my ego is enlarging it for me, it doesn't make it truth. I always have to be skeptical of my feelings and not necessarily confuse them with truth. And this is not just contemporary self-help. This is literally the wisdom of the sages in the first verse, where the men of the great assembly said three things. And we're going through this quickly because we're really going to do the next verse today. But what did they say? They said, this is from last week, Hevu mitunim ba din. As we switch into the Rabbinic Judaism, prophecy is over. The passive sort of childlike religion is over. Where sort of plan B really is plan A in the sense that it's time for us to grow up and be more participatory in our religion. The very, very first thing that our sages tell us is, Hevu mitunim, be very, very careful in what? Din. In rendering judgments on people, on things, on institutions, on other people's beliefs. Be very, very careful that in this case, if you think that a mitzvah no longer applies in modern times, be very, very careful to elevate to like raise yourself up to the mitzvah and not bring the mitzvah down necessarily to your biased mind, which has agendas and frail egos. Be very, very careful. And of course, we quoted a rabbi who said, don't read batunim, but nitunim, which changes the reading to be the subject of your din, of your judgment, which essentially means put yourself in their shoes as much as one is possible and try to use your imagination, which is a God-given gift. It's called dimyon. Try to use your imagination to imagine what it would be like to feel something from their perspective. So the first thing the sages say is be very, very careful. And of course, we live in a culture which is so the antithesis of careful. Reputations are destroyed in a moment. That is the like with a click of a post. That is the antithesis of Jewish wisdom. Be very, very careful. And before you render any judgment, to the best of your ability, put yourself in their shoes and imagine what their experience might be before you render a judgment on them. The next words of wisdom in our first verse is my eyes. My vision is like slowly, I'm losing it. God forbid, I'm not losing my vision, but I need my glasses. Baha'amidu b'talmidim harbe. Raise up or stand up many, many disciples. Now, this really is about primarily that when prophecy was over and it was the rabbis were going to play a much more central role, it was very, very important that one rabbi not have all the power, that raise up. And we quoted another wonderful rabbi who says, don't read ha'amidu, just raise them up. Raise them up, make them proud, make them strong, fill them with wisdom so that their cup runneth over into other people. You will see that, and this is also very, very powerful for us, that We are limited by our subjective experience. But the more people who have the wisdom, the more, almost like a prism, the more facets, the more we can see truth from multiple lenses, which doesn't mean that there isn't an empirical truth passed on in the form of our Torah, but within the parameters of our empirical truth, of Jewish law, of Torah, there are so many facets. It's really a warning here on cult of personality, on there being one centralized figure, and also just the power of multiple perspectives. So that's also very powerful. And the last thing we didn't really get to is va'asu siag l'Torah, which means make a fence for the Torah. We do this all the time. The rabbis did something called making fences. It's almost like if you have a beautiful jewel, you have a beautiful, beautiful diamond ring. You wouldn't leave it on a table and walk away, right? Like Sue, hold up your fingers, right? You wouldn't leave it on a table and walk away. You would protect it. It's protecting what's precious. Our mitzvahs passed on from Sinai are so precious, so profoundly precious, that the rabbis instituted fences, almost like if there's a ledge, right? If there's a little bit of a, like just a little step, then there's no ledge. If there's an abyss, there's a ledge far away from the abyss, so you don't fall in. If you go to Grand Canyon, or if you go to the top of the Sears Tower, there are ledges that protect you from going too far. And that is the nature of the rabbis' rabbinical fences. Just for one of many, many examples is lighting candles. So there's something called sundown. Let's say sundown. In Israel, we moved the clocks already. You're moving the clocks next week, right? But we've already moved the clocks. So let's say sundown is so early now, it's like 4:30, right? So you have until 4:40. So let's say sundown is 4:48. Then it will say candle lighting is at 4:30, which means that you light the candles around 4:30. Why? Because it's a fence, so you don't get too close to the actual halachic time of sundown. The mitzvahs are precious, so we build fences so as not to trespass them. But there's even actually a very beautiful commentary that I read by Rabbi Howard Witkin, who's a contemporary rabbi, and he said, rabbinical fences also give us the opportunity. Sometimes the mitzvot are not really applicable, or they're far away, so the fences allow us closer contact with them. It almost gives us more intimacy with practically doing the mitzvot. So these are, I'm going a little bit fast because we're moving on this week, but the bottom line is the first, I would say that the first verse is a little bit of a warning, which is you are incredibly powerful and you are incredibly fragile. Your ego is incredibly fragile, and you must be very, very careful. You have to be careful with judgment. You have to be careful not to put too much preeminence on your own wisdom, but be available and open to the possibilities of others. And you should also make fences for yourself, because the nature of life is there's a part of us that wants what's forbidden. So we are frail in the areas of temptation. So make a fence for yourself. Make a fence, because when, like Rabbi Twersky said, and I'm going to read it again, I think it's so powerful. In all my years of drinking, I never once took a drink unless I decided that it was the right thing to do at the time. When you want something, you will tell yourself it's the right thing to do. Like it says in Proverbs, all the person's ways, this is in the book of Proverbs, listen to this. This is so powerful. All of a person's ways are right in his eyes. We have to be very careful with ourselves. So the first verse is a little bit of a warning. But then now for our next verse, if you've got your book, it's on page 4. We now have the great words of Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous, who was one of the high priests toward the beginning of the Second Temple. He was really a great, great rabbi and also a tremendous diplomat. He kind of saved Jewry and was able to sway Alexander the Great to be an ally of the Jewish people. So he was credited really with a lot of Jewish survival. But it was a time in Jewish history where the Jews were really flung all over the globe. Don't forget, in the period of the first temple, they were basically all in Israel. But when the first temple was destroyed, they got flung all over the globe, and only a handful, or not very many, came back to Israel for the second temple. So Shimon HaTzadik understood, wow, the Jews, and also somewhat prophetically, the Jews are going to be flung all over the world. This is very important because we're still flung all over the world. The Jews have to know what the bottom line is. That they have to have a bottom line understanding of how to live, because we're not centralized anymore. We're not all in Israel anymore. Prophecy is ending, and we're going to enter a darker, more confusing era. People are going to live. At that time, it was Babylonia, but one day it was going to be Germany, and one day it was going to be Spain, and one day it was going to be America. And the desire to give a bottom line, you have to know this is the kind of raison d'etre of our next verse. So Julie, go to our the class that I sent to our class, and we'll read it. I'll read it in Hebrew while Julie's pulling it up. Okay. Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous, Hayam Yesharei Knesset HaGadola. He was one of the last survivors of the Great Assembly. Hu Haya Omer. By the way, when you hear Hu Haya Omer, he used to say, it's kind of like every sage had his, not mantra, but his sort of like, Hu Haya Omer meant these were his like golden words. This was really his tagline, so to speak. This is what he was all about. And this will be very familiar to many of you. Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed. The world stands on three things. Our world exists by virtue of three pillars. Al HaTorah, the Al HaAvodah, the Al Gemilut Chasadim. On the Torah, on divine worship, which is prayer. So on the Torah, on prayer, and on acts of kindness, one to the other. A person, this is extremely helpful, I think. If you ever want to understand, if you want an anchor for how to move forward in your life, to feel that you're moving forward, you're moving towards something, that you're building yourself, that you're working on yourself. It's very helpful to consider visually, almost like a tripod, that there are three aspects of self, three relationships that you have. I think Eve talked about that in her class. Three legs of a table. And if you want to be a whole human being, work on each component. So you, as a human being, the Jewish people as a nation, humanity itself stands on a tripod of three things: on the study of Torah, on prayer, and on acts of loving kindness. It's interesting because if you think about a three-legged table or a tripod, camera tripod, if you remove one leg, then the table falls. And I think that it's fair to say that very often in Jewish history and contemporary Jewish history, sometimes there's a tremendous value placed on one aspect of Jewish expression. So sometimes there's a tremendous value placed on, let's say, tikkun olam, or acts of kindness, which is extremely important. But if it's at the expense of strong Torah learning, it won't endure. But the same thing is true in reverse. if there's strong Torah learning, but there isn't an energy of love and kindness and giving one to the other, then it's not holistic and it won't endure. So you, in your pursuit of working on yourself, of being the maximal you can be, you exist in balance with three aspects, three relationships, three aspects of self, and they are your Torah learning, your prayer, and your acts of loving kindness. So if you're ever seeking to kind of build yourself, it's worth creating a goal in each of these three areas, because that's totality and balance from a Jewish perspective. If we put the emphasis on one to the expense of the other, then it's not whole, and it's not endurable. If you imagine a table, a three-legged table or a tripod, it won't last, which is why really at the end of the day, it is really worth thinking what is going to stand the test of time, what endures. So the another way of understanding holistic Judaism is it's about the whole self, how we think, what we speak, and what we do. You could say thinking is our Torah, speaking is our prayer, and do is our acts of kindness. It's not so simple, but Judaism is a holistic pursuit. It's not just a part of you. It is based on three fundamental relationships. When I say relationships, that means that Torah represents the relationship to yourself. Even though it's from God, it's God's mind, you're learning God's mind, so to speak. It's the pursuit of understanding and you delving deeper in your own growth and understanding. Whereas prayer is your relationship with God. I always quote Ruchi Koval because she said it so beautifully, that Torah is learning, Torah is how God thinks, and prayer is how we think. I'm misquoting her. I can't remember exactly what she said, but Torah represents your relationship to yourself. Prayer represents your relationship to God, and Gimulut Chasadim represents your relationship to others. So we need all of them. They are the three pillars that endure. Now let's start with Torah, because if you here, Julie, just scroll down a little bit. Okay, so now it's interesting to understand that there are many threes in Judaism. There are many kind of categories of three, and right now I just want to bring in one other category of three, which is our Avot, our forefathers. Abraham, who represented kindness. Isaac, who represented prayer, that's this week's Torah portion, and Jacob, who represented Torah. And it's very interesting because not this week's Torah portion, but very, very soon, it might be next week's Torah portion, we're going to have Jacob wrestling with the angel. The angel represents the spirit of Esav. Esav, his brother, represents kind of the epitome, the symbol of all anti-Semitism, of all Jew hatred, of all evil for the world, like continuously through the world. But what's interesting is that the spirit of Esav, the evil angel, so to speak, doesn't do battle with Abraham, who represents kindness, and he doesn't do battle with Isaac, who represents prayer, because those in and of themselves are not threatening. But the Torah represents Jewish eternity. It's very interesting because I remember when I was studying like modern Russian Jewish history, and we learned that the Soviets allowed the synagogues to stay open, but they didn't allow for the study of Judaism. And it was also true in ancient Greece. The ancient Greek establishment allowed for the existence of synagogues, but they didn't allow for the study of Torah. because Torah represents Jewish eternity. I think it was Buber. I can't remember who said this, but the way to understand Torah is it's like the portable homeland of the Jewish people. Before we had the land of Israel, we were kicked out of the land of Israel for 2,000 years. We're now back in the land of Israel, but for 2,000 years we were wandering and continue to wander to a certain degree from place to place. What kept us unified was our Torah, and that the rabbis say that's why Jacob, the kind of the evil angel that represented at its base hatred of Jews, did battle with Jacob, because Jacob represented Torah. It says that he was a wholesome man, abiding in tents. Abiding in tents represented the study of Torah. It represents Jewish eternity. It's our portable homeland. Wherever we go, we study the same Torah portion, we learn the same Talmud, it unifies the Jewish people and creates a unity in our pursuit of understanding the mind of Hashem, the mind of God. So this is one pillar that is the kind of the pillar of pillars. And I'll tell you why it's the pillar of pillars. Because if you don't know what the Torah wants from you, or I'll phrase it positively, the more you know what the Torah wants from you, then the more, when you pray, the more you know before whom you stand, the more you understand whom you stand before. There is no prayer without Torah. And there's no real acts of loving kindness, ironically, without Torah, because Torah tells us what is kindness and what in fact isn't kindness. A good example of that is when King Saul is commissioned to destroy the Amalekites completely. He's told by the prophet to kill all the nation, the evil Amalekite nation. But in his sense of kindness, he leaves King Agag behind. And King Agag, in the night that he still survived, he was subsequently killed, but in the night that he still survived, he sired a son who was the great grandfather or whatever it was of Haman, the Hitler-like figure in the Purim story who sought to annihilate the Jewish people. So the reason I'm bringing this story up is it felt like an act of kindness on the part of King Shaul, on the king, to have mercy on King Agag, on not killing King Agag, because in his, again, we're going back to our first verse, which is be careful, be really careful. You're very powerful, but you also have to be careful. You should always have healthy skepticism around your views and your opinions and what you think is true. King Saul thought that was the kind thing to do, but from a Torah perspective, it wasn't a kind thing to do. And in fact, he sired, that night he had sexual relations and ultimately sired the ancestor of the person who sought to annihilate the Jewish people. So how does the Torah define kindness? There are parameters. There are things that might surprise you. So again, be matunim badin. Don't, going back to our first verse, be very, very deliberate. Bring yourself up to the Torah's parameters instead of the much more likely kind of ego-based striving, which is to bring the Torah to what makes sense to us, to bring it down to what makes sense to us. It's really, how can I express my creativity, myself, and how can I express within the Torah's parameters that the Torah sets out for me. So this is Torah. Torah is Netzach. Torah is eternity. Torah is the pillar of pillars. Torah is represented by Jacob, who was the third of the three patriarchs, and the one who represents the harmony of everything and represents our Torah. And then we have avoda. Avoda is our relationship to God, that represented by our forefather Isaac. It says very soon in a Torah portion coming soon to you, that Isaac went out to pray in the field toward evening, and he raised his eyes and saw, and behold, camels were coming. And this is the story of Isaac and Rivka that we actually read. We were reading this week. So prayer. So prayer is one of the pillars that the world stands on. Okay, Julie, go down to the next page. Okay, wait, just go to the top of the next page. Okay, so if you think of Torah as bringing God's wisdom down to this world, that when we learn Torah, we're bringing God's wisdom down to this world. In prayer, we're bringing our strivings, our feelings to Hashem. It's the opposite direction, so to speak. But it's truly understanding that I also think of prayer as a reminder how powerful we are. Every single one of us has a huge part of us that doesn't really believe that Hashem is truly with us when we pray. We're always questioning that. Are you really listening? Does it really matter? And the concept of prayer as pillar is that our words, our ability to form words, our ability to share our aspirations with God is absolutely a pillar of our Judaism. And the third one is Gemilut Chasadim, which means acts of kindness. It actually translates as acts of kindnesses. And that, of course, is related to others, our relationship to others. And of course, Abraham represents the acts of kindness. It's all through the description of Abraham is visiting the sick and feeding the hungry and having guests and fighting for the wicked people of Sodom. He represents the pursuit of human dignity and love of others. But I think what's something that's very, very powerful about, you have Torah, which is singular, avodah or prayer, which is singular. And then you have this word called acts of kindnesses. And I want to just draw your attention to the fact that both of those two words are in the plural, because kindness is the one area where it's twofold. When you give, the other person receives, and so do you. You get as much or more by giving as you do by receiving. It's the most fascinating thing, that God creates the world in such a way that when it comes to kindness, the giver is the receiver, that the giver receives so very much. And the receiver, we've talked about this so much in the past, the receiver gives the giver the chance to be godly. And I bring that up because it's so important we allow people to give to us. It is so important that we allow people to give to us. If we don't allow people to give to us, oh, it's okay, we don't need it. If we don't allow that, then we are preventing them from the joy of being givers, or from the godliness that they feel when they give. So it is the only pillar that's phrased in the plural, because the giver receives just as much as the receiver receives. And it's probably designed that way so that we have a certain motivation to give, because the world is built on loving kindness. If we didn't get something very deep, maybe we wouldn't do it. I just want to share with you that David started volunteering. I mean, at first he wanted to volunteer, but it's also an attempt to really learn the language. It's an attempt to not just sit in class, but actually volunteer and actually speak Hebrew throughout the day. So he started to volunteer for a place called Yad Sarah. Yad Sarah is basically more than any governmental body or any medical body. Yad Sarah lends for free. It's a gamach. It lends medical equipment for free. So if you need anything, any form of wheelchair or cane or specific bed or specific shoes or specific this or that, whatever you need, you can go to Yad Sarah and you can borrow it. And it's for free, and you return it when you're done. And it is a massive organization. But David told me today, because he went for his training today, there are 6,000 volunteers for Yad Sarah. There are 150 paid employees. There are 6,000 volunteers. The human being is a giver, and God creates an energy. There is just a psychological reality that givers receive, that it feels so good to give. And so it really is, it's phrased in double talk. Kindnesses, because when we give, we feel so much better. And when we don't give, we feel so much worse. So I think it's very profound that it's in the double. Now, remember, the chronology also teaches us Torah is at the foundation. Why? Because if you don't know the Torah, it's hard to understand who you're standing before when you pray. And if you don't study the Torah, then your chesed might be, your kindness might not be channeled in the right way. It's very important to know what the parameters of kindness are. Where is it a mitzvah? Where is it not a mitzvah? Remember King Saul, who really thought he was being like a caring individual when he spared King Agag, but that actually led to the potential destruction of the Jewish people. So I read somewhere, and I think it's really powerful that, we all wonder, like, we all just kind of feel like, what's it all about? Where am I going? What's my direction? Sorry, turn that off. What's my direction? What's it all about? To understand that there are three pillars to our existence, and that we should always be involved and growing in those three pillars, it really touches on something very profound. King Solomon says, Hevel Chavalim, vanity of vanities. It's all vanity. It's pretty depressing. He's saying, at the end of the day, you're going to die. And it doesn't matter how much money you had, and it doesn't matter how powerful you are, and it doesn't matter how many likes on Facebook you had, and it doesn't matter anything. None of it matters. It's all vanity, unless it's all basically zeros. It doesn't last. When you die, it goes with you. It's zero, vanity of vanities, Hevel Chavalim, zero of zeros. It's zero unless you put a number before it. If you put a 1 before the 0, then the zeros add exponentially. If you put a 1 before the 0, then every single 0, enlarges it, to the largest degree imaginable. When a human being does acts because they know that there are pillars that not only uphold the world, but justify your existence and give purpose to all your strivings, then you've put a 1 before your zeros. So we have this short life. None of us live forever. We're all confronting mortality on some level. We don't know when we're going to die. Many of you have struggled with health. We're struggling with frailty, with change, with vulnerability, with aging, with sickness. People, and the sense of like, what is this all about? And really, what is this all about is what King Solomon's saying. He's saying 0 of zeros. It's 0. The business, the this, that. it's 0 unless you put a number before it. And if you put a number before it, it is almost infinite in scope. And the metaphorical number before it is when a human being says, God, you put me on this earth to be a partner with you. You could have given it to me all for free, but then it would be like, I wouldn't have earned it. It would be like free bread. It would be like, I didn't earn it. So you put me in a world of difficulty. You put me in a world of confusion. You gave me a massive yetzer hara. You gave me a negative inclination. You gave me many temptations. You put me in a world, a confusing world. But if you give me the pathway to put a number before my acts, before my actions, before everything that I do in my life, then I can grow myself exponentially and take it with me into the next world, because the mitzvahs you can take into the next world. We all know, I won't even tell the story. It's been told so many times. I think the Baron de Rothschild or whoever it was, who requested to be buried in his socks. You all know the story that at the end of the day, even Baron de Rothschild I think it was him, was not allowed, I think it was him, Edmund Rothschild was not allowed, even he, the Bill Gates or the what's his name, Bezos of his day, even he wasn't allowed to be buried in his socks. According to Jewish law, you can't even be buried with anything in your casket, in your kever. So you can't even take your socks with you. But when you put a number before your zeros, you can take it all with you, because mitzvot you can take with you into the next world. So this is so important. King Solomon wasn't telling us vanity of hevel, chavalim, zechol hevel. He wasn't saying that to dismiss the importance of being alive. He was saying, be very, very careful. Be wise enough to know that when you put a number before your zeros, you are infinite, you do infinite good, and life is infinitely purposeful. What does it mean to do that? It means I am here for 3 things. I am here for my relationship with myself, for my relationship with God, for my relationship with other people. The more I learn Torah, the more I understand the mind of God, so to speak, I know before whom I'm standing. The more I know before whom I'm standing, the more I can call out and say, Master of the world, there's nothing besides you. The more I can build a relationship through my own prayer with God. And the more I understand Torah and prayer, the more I understand that it's all about giving back, that the world is created with chesed in double form, because it feels so much better to be a giver. We're created to give, but not just to give. We're created to learn Torah, to strive in Torah, to pray to Hashem, and to give to other people. And that is don't forget, going back to our original point, that who was Shimon HaTzadik? Shimon HaTzadik was one of the last of the men of the Great Assembly. He knew that the Jews had already been sent into exile. Very few of them were back in Israel. And he knew that Jewish history was going to be long, dark, and confusing. And so he gave us a way to put a 1 before our zeros, so that we could live our lives and ultimately meet our deaths, knowing that we knew what it was about. He gave us a tremendous gift. Your life exists on a tripod. Jewish history exists on a tripod, and humanity itself exists on a tripod. You have 3 relationships. You're never going to master them all, but you should always be striving in 3. In fact, I would tell you, if you have a friend in this class, you sit with them this week and just, or if you don't have a friend in this class, which I hope everybody does, but if you don't, we can partner you with somebody and discuss with them, where can I grow in Torah? How can I grow in prayer? And how can I take it up a notch with my acts of loving kindness? And we'll end here with the last words from Rabbi Zvi Freeman. Julie, just go down a little bit. Because again, this goes back to our first verse, which from the rabbis, which is, you are two things. You are very, very powerful as a human being, and you should be very skeptical of yourself because you're a human being. Because you're a human being, you're incredibly powerful. Because you're a human being, you should be very skeptical of yourself and your judgments and your feelings. And you should always, always have a certain amount of skepticism about how you render judgment. But we'll end here with these words. The word for world in Hebrew is olam, which is related to the word ne'elam or ha'elam, which means concealment. The world was created in such a way. So world, he's saying world and hiding or concealment are the same word. The world was created in such a way that godliness is buried and it's concealed within it. In other words, you have to strive to find God. He's hidden. The nature of the world is literally, the world in its essence is hiddenness. Only by removing the concealment will the light of godliness hidden within it be revealed. Every person has the mission and the obligation to remove concealment through his service to God. Every person is obligated to say, the world, ha'olam, hanivra b'shvili, the world was created for me. Don't read this as the world, read it as concealment, hiddenness. God's hiddenness was created for me. Every person has the mission and the obligation to remove concealment through his relationship to Hashem or her relationship to Hashem. How does he do this? Regarding this, Shimon HaTzadik used to say, the world stands upon three things. The concealment remains until removed by three things: Torah, prayer, and acts of kindness. Through them, the inner light is revealed. So I just want to go over that real quick one more time. The world means olam, comes from the word ne'elam or he'elam. The world is God's concealment. And we've all experienced that. It's like, it's not right there, but you know it's there. You know it's there, but it's not obvious. Only by removing the concealment will God be revealed. But we say in the Talmud, Bishvil li nivra ha'olam, for my sake the world was created. But don't read it, the world. Read, God concealed himself for my sake, because he wants me to remove the concealment through my relationship with him. How do I do this? Reb Shimon, who stood at a crossroads in Jewish history, and really was one of the people who saved the Jewish people, who saved Torah. He said, how do you do it? You do it in three ways: your relationship through Torah, your prayer, and your acts of kindness. So as much as we do homework over the week, I think it's really worthwhile to connect with one of the other people in this group and actually think of one way you could elevate each of these areas: your relationship to self through Torah, your relationship to God through prayer, your relationship to others through acts of loving kindness, and understand how powerful that really makes you. You are not that we're all zeros, but King Solomon says, be careful. You cannot take your socks with you to the next world. He didn't say that, and so we want to put a number before our zeros. And that way we can live our lives knowing that it's unified in true purpose. And we can also recognize that death is, which we always have to face, is something we can face because we are so very, very powerful when we put the reason for all of it before all of our strivings. So, okay, so that's the end of the hour. But if anybody would like to share anything, we have 3 minutes. I don't want to lose my 3 minutes. Oh, I didn't see some of you. Hi. Okay, we have, who did I not? Hi, Stacy. Hi, Stephen. Who else did I? Nadine. I didn't see everybody. Yes. There's Barry, Elaine, Natalie. Okay, so and others I'm sure I didn't see. Okay, so let's hear any thoughts from anybody. Of course, if you have to leave, don't worry. But if anybody would like to share something, I'd love to hear.
I have a question. Acts of loving kindness, are they diminished when you tell people that you're doing them?
Anybody want to weigh in on this? Are acts of loving kindness, you're saying if you publicize them, are they diminished? If you make them known to other people? What do you guys, anyone have thoughts on that?
I feel like they are, and that's that's one way that I need to heighten my acts of loving kindness, I think.
Oh, hold on 1 second. Stay there, Jan.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that in the pillar, you exist on a tripod. Your whole, the rationale, the justification for your existence is on a tripod. So you're saying you're thinking about taking up your kindness up a notch by not sharing it.
Correct.
You want to talk a little bit more about that? Like, what's motivating you here?
I mean, you know that I work 3 days a week, and I do it without asking for payment, monetary payment. I don't need it because I get so fulfilled by doing it. But the question is, when I share with somebody that I'm doing it, and then I bring up the idea that I'm doing it without monetary benefit, does that diminish my mitzvah?
No, not at all.
You don't think so?
No, not at all. I do the same thing.
I don't think so either.
Okay, Stephen, you answered emphatically. Why did you answer so emphatically?
I mean, I volunteer. I mean, people know that I volunteer. I'm doing good. I'm helping others. What's wrong with letting people know that you volunteer?
You should be proud of it.
There's nothing wrong with it at all.
Rebison?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Len, Donna.
Yeah. So
Hi, Len.
if you tie it to charity, then you've got the Rambam's, I think it's 8 levels, which could be a construct for answering the question.
Right. So can you synopsize that, Len? I mean, not all of his levels, but why do you bring up the Rambam?
Sure. Giving lower levels are giving when you're asked, giving grudgingly, giving and with you being known, to giving anonymously, to helping others to help themselves, is broadly like the summary of the 8 levels, with the latter ones being in Rambam's take a higher level, although it is tied to tzedakah. And your question was really, the question was really around chesed. So I don't know if it's a good construct or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's, what is your motivation to share it? Based on your motivation.
In
Yes,
other
and
words, if
encourage
you're
it.
sharing it, okay, Katie, go on, because I think you're hitting on, like, so Len's
Yeah.
bringing up the Rambam, which is basically the highest level is, well, not the very highest, but one of the highest levels is to do something anonymously. But Katie, you're reflecting on intention here.
Right. I mean, if you're doing it to be recognized, yes, I think it takes away from it. Like if you're feeling like you need the recognition for it. if you're sharing it because somebody asks you about your work and they're just genuinely interested and you explain it to them, you're not looking for the recognition, you're just answering a question. I feel like it depends where it's coming from. I mean, I do have friends that love to say, oh, and I did this and I did this. And I feel like sometimes they're just saying that to me because they want me to be like, you're such a good person. So I just, and I think only the individual knows why they're sharing it. I think when you're sharing that, in yourself, like why you're sharing it.
Yeah,
So
we-
motivation,
we-
huge. Yeah.
Yeah,
Who's that,
I-
Hannah? Yeah.
I was going to say that I do an awful lot of volunteer work and I do share it sometimes. And I've noticed that it catches on to other people. In other words,
Right.
when
So
I,
if you don't share it, right, there's that.
Yeah,
You're saying if I
because-
don't share it, then
Okay.
people don't know that it's possible.
exactly, because like I'm very involved, well, not very, I used to be with the Illinois Holocaust Museum and I'm very proud of it. And then I told a friend of mine and now she's a docent. So,
Right.
I think it's very nice to share. I mean, I'm a big believer,
Yeah, right. So Hannah's
think
making a
that's
great
it.
point.
Mhm.
If I don't share it, then people don't necessarily think about it. It helps raise people's awareness for themselves. Yeah. Okay. Donna, Sue.
Thank you. I was just going to add some
Susie?
of what the same comments actually, but I've also, been in organization, volunteer work forever, and it's really meaningful to share in a productive way, to encourage others, to remind them about chesed, to share that, that message, if you will. I'm not a teacher, so I wouldn't say I teach, but it's like it's doing, not saying, mostly is how I work, but it's all part of it. And I think I'm not talking about the dollar donation, I'm talking about the service. And I think I feel very connected to my Judaism in that way.
Yep. Adrian. Yeah. Susie.
No, I was going to say what Hannah said. So
Yeah, that's a huge thing. That is a huge component. And Len, I don't know if you're still there, but I thought about that in the context of the Rambam a tremendous amount, which is if you're anonymous, it's a higher level of tzedakah. But then does anonymous deprive other people from considering giving for themselves? I've always thought, and I don't know the answer, maybe you can do a little research, Len, because that's a little bit of a glitch in the Rambam's levels. If nobody shares, then nobody knows. And then if nobody knows, nobody's motivated to, I don't understand. I've always wondered about that too.
Well, you can't be a role model if you're invisible.
You can't be a role model if you're invisible. Yep.
Or
Yeah.
a mentor. You can't be a mentor either. The only time I would not share information, which I've never done, but if I was working, let's say, for Planned Parenthood or something like that, then obviously I wouldn't want to. But
So, I mean, maybe we're left with Katie's, maybe all we can do is be very honest with ourselves and do the soul searching that Katie's bringing up, which is what is motivating me. But if we honestly believe that what's motivating us is to encourage others to be more godly and to give more, then maybe we're duty bound to share, which is why I don't understand the Rambam. Back to Len's levels. I really don't. Yes, Susie. Oh wait, you gotta put your thing, yeah.
I 100% agree with the motivation of that's the core of this. Why are you talking about it? And if you're talking the motivation, if your motivation is to encourage other people to know about your issue and to know about what the problem is, and then maybe they will be motivated to help with it or something else. But you don't have to talk about the money, whether you're getting paid or you're not getting paid. That's really kind of irrelevant to the core of the issue. The other way, the negative part about talking about it is, Judaism places a lot of emphasis on humility as opposed to arrogance. And if you really talk about it a lot and depends on the context that you're talking about it. Look, they're these people, they really need help. this is a great organization. Maybe you want to support them in some way, whether through money or whether through giving of yourself. I think that's more the way to talk about it than, you don't have to talk about what your role is per se in terms of financial.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
just
right.
want to say, Ellie, that I'm very involved with Stand With Us, and we're having our gala this Sunday. So I'm not afraid to say, if anybody wants to donate, it's fine. And I'm on the committee, so I just had to put that in.
That's
Why
a
don't you
totally
s-
different thing. That's,
Yeah,
that's asking people to
absolutely.
support a charity. That's wonderful.
Yeah, Hannah, why don't you send that to Julie and maybe she could do something kind of creative with that?
Yeah, because I've also spoken to the Levies, and remember how we did the program, Ellie? I did it with you and the
Yes,
rest. We had such a fabulous turnout.
yeah,
And
we
when I
did,
get back from Arizona, I would love to do it again with you guys. Not
definitely.
with you. Okay, great. Thank you
That
so
was
much.
great.
I'll send it to you, Julie.
Okay, anybody else on our 3 pillars?
Well, yes.
Okay,
And-
hi, Stephen.
Hi, you can't possibly know that another 10 generations, your progeny is going to do something good or bad. So it was just interesting. You were saying what we think is an act of kindness may not be an act of kindness according to the Torah. Torah explains things differently than we may perceive them. But I'm thinking the example that you gave us is so opaque that
Mhm,
it doesn't make sense to me.
mhm. Yeah, it's a pretty, I don't know what you mean by opaque, but it wasn't the best example. What do you mean by opaque?
Well, you can't see into the future. I mean, you're looking into a dark hole that, that the child I may have, who may have another, who may have another, who may have another, may do something terrible.
Well, no, but I bring up the example of King Saul because King Saul was told through prophecy that he had to do something. He made a decision to do it differently because it didn't fit into his concept of what kindness was. And ultimately that led to, but it's not the simplest example. I think we could think of something better, for sure.
The way I may be wrong, the way I understood you were talking about it, and maybe you can clarify it for me, is that by following what the Torah says, you're connecting to eternity, because the Torah is eternal. So that means what the Torah is basically telling you is that if you follow the Torah in future generations, you won't get all the wires crossed and it'll be the way it's supposed to be. That's the way I understood. Is that the case or am I off?
I don't know about the second part. The first part, the idea of linking your strivings with what's eternal. And that's the concept of hevel chaval and kol hevel, of zeros, and the zero story is that we're given the ability to link all of our strivings with the eternal. And to do that, we need the pillar of Torah. The pillar of Torah tells us, it's like literally the word Torah comes from the verb lahorot or hora'ah, which means a manual or instructions for living. That's really what the Torah is. So I think the first, I don't know about the second part, Carolyn, but the first part, the idea of connecting our strivings with the Torah, which is why the whole thing begins with Hevel Matunim Badin. Be very, very deliberate in your judgment, because as a human being, you have a desire to see things in the way that makes sense to you, and to sort of bring the Torah to your concept of morality or your concept of justice. But deliberation and judgment really means understanding that we're always striving to take our strivings and connect them to the Torah, which doesn't change. So I didn't really say that right, but I think the first part is very accurate. Anyone else?
Well, if nobody else has anything else, Ally, how are you doing?
Stephen, did you, oh, my furniture's coming on Wednesday and then I'm gonna give you a tour.
Okay.
Stephen's been asking me for a tour of my house and I keep saying, no, I'm waiting for my living room furniture to come.
How are the
We're doing-
neighbors?
Oh, it was fine.
Okay.
It was fine. It's fine. We were very proud of, did everybody see the photos of Ari Laib and his army, the army?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, we're very, very proud. We're doing great. We're doing great. But it's an understatement to say how much I miss this group, really. Very, very much.
You're
So
always
guys, think this
welcome.
week, think
This
this
is the
week
best.
about, yeah, think this week about your, this idea of 3 pillars. And what it would mean to just kind of, to grow in every area, understanding like that. Read the last little part again, that this is the way this is the way we bring godliness to the world. So if you, like, let's say if Jan decides, you know what, maybe I don't have to hide that I'm just going to be more quiet with my acts of kindness, then that is so powerful. It's because, you know, as Len said, the Rambam really does have levels and the ability to not self-aggrandize, which is very, very holy. So if you know yourself, back to Katie's point, you know yourself. So if there is a little bit of like self-aggrandizement, then to keep that quiet, incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. You are tapping into the 3 pillars that give reason for your existence, that hold up the world. These are the 3 pillars that the world stands on. The world stands on 3 things. These are serious. So to be growing in them consciously is very, very powerful. All right, everybody. It's wonderful to learn with everybody.
What
Really,
time
really
is
wonderful.
it there, Al?
Thank you, thank you.
Well, we had our time change already, so it's 8:15.
תודה רבה וכל טוב. We should have a Hebrew lesson at the end of each session.
Yeah, that's right. You can give a little Hebrew lesson at the end.
You can say תודה
All right,
רבה. Everybody say תודה רבה, which means thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, goodbye,
Give me
everybody.
proud.
Thank
Donna,
you.
are we speaking now?
Tomorrow,
Okay.
I thought, tomorrow. Does that
Is
work?
it? That's totally fine. Is it tomorrow?
I have it
I'll
written
call you
down tomorrow. Is that good?
Okay, and what time did we say?
2:00 my time?
That's right. So that's 9 my time. Okay, I'll talk to you
That
tomorrow.
work? Is that, you want to
Yep.
do 1:00? Is that better?
No, it's good. It's good.
All right,
Very good.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye,
everybody. Have a wonderful day.
You
See you
too.
soon.
Thank you so, Toda.